All right, what's going on, everyone? We're going to talk about a subject today that usually, at least in my experience, is an automatic demonetization topic for a video. And usually the videos end up getting age restricted, so they get shuttled off to the corners of the internet where nobody sees them. It's just these topics, the one we're going to get into, tends to be something where these platforms can't differentiate, in my opinion, very well, between discussing and informing about an organization versus advocating and promoting it. So what we're going to get into here is ISKP, Islamic State Khorasan Province. Aaron Zellin is an incredible resource in this area. I'll link his website, Jihadology, in the description below. But he wrote a recent article for the Washington Institute titled ISKP Goes Global, External Operations from Afghanistan. And I wanted to get into this because the whole global war on terror, I feel like because a major attack hasn't happened in so long, it's easy to look at that as either no longer being a threat or that we've got the thing completely contained. And Zellin brings up some good points here about why we really do need to keep an eye on some of these organizations and not let our foot off the gas. Although his prescription at the end of this article for what we should do, I think just hits a part of it. In my opinion, just what we've seen over the last 20 plus years, I don't know that we have the full answer quite yet. But Zellin says that shortly after taking power, the current Taliban government established its internal security arm, the General Directorate of Intelligence, GDI. Yet the agency did not begin reporting arrests of ISKP members until July 2022. And a major reason for this was that the Taliban, after taking power, they said, we don't have any of these international terror organizations here on our territory. In fact, they went so far as to say in, I think, March of 2022, that ISKP was an intelligence project of the occupiers, so NATO and U.S. forces, that completely disappeared after the end of the occupation and currently does not have a physical presence in any part of the country, which, look, it wasn't true. It wasn't true then. It's not true now. ISKP has been in Afghanistan since roughly, I want to say it's 2015 timeframe. And there was a stretch in there. They're not friends with the Taliban. They're adversaries. They're not friends of the United States, of course, right? So there was a stretch of time in Afghanistan where ISKP was fighting battles on one side of a mountain with the Taliban, and they'd cross over the mountain into a supposed safe haven and catch airstrikes from U.S. and coalition partners. So the fight's been very real against ISKP for quite a while, which is an offshoot of the broader Islamic State that really calls its home kind of Iraq, Syria region. ISKP is more the Khorasan region down in Afghanistan and Pakistan. But it has changed, and it does appear that the Taliban have been somewhat effective in kind of mitigating the effectiveness of ISKP within their borders, not necessarily externally, and we'll get more on that in a second. But Zellin says that in 2022 to 2023, attacks decreased even more than they did in 2019 to 20 when the U.S.-led coalition and Afghan security forces took concerted action against ISKP and before the organization's current leader, Shabab al-Muhajir, took the reins. Zellin says that in the 18-19 timeframe, there were 400 attacks, and then moving year by year, that went down to 157, up to 275, up to 314, and then dropped again to just 69 attacks from August 2022 to August 2023. So we do have, the actual full year reporting there. Zellin points to two kind of conflicting reasons that the violence overall, ISKP-directed violence in Afghanistan, could be down. First is kind of the obvious one here. And what the Taliban are saying is that they're taking the fight to ISKP, pushing them out, making them less effective across the country. There you go. A more concerted campaign, and the Taliban have proven to be more effective than the U.S. and coalition partners. That's one argument. The other argument is he points back to one of the ISKP's publications called The Voice of Khorasan, which it's in English. It's in a bunch of different languages. You can check that out if you want. I'm not going to link to it. I think that's a trigger to maybe end up on a list somewhere that I don't want to be on. But if you search the internet long enough and deep enough, you can find the English versions of ISKP's publications. Anyways, in that publication back in, he says in August, they talk about a strategic silence policy within Islamic State. So it's hard to understand. We're getting conflicting views. Taliban says they're crushing ISKP. ISKP says, no, this is our plan. Our plan is to kind of slow down attacks internally, which you can understand from an organization that maybe has a foot on their throat, right? We're just going to write this away. This is what we intended to do. But it does kind of line up with what we've seen from IS elements elsewhere around the world and kind of connects with what we're seeing in terms of more externally focused operations for the organization. They can't do everything all at once. So moving to some of those external ops, it says that Zelensky says that ISKP has pursued a two-pronged strategy. The first is ongoing propaganda campaign, which we mentioned their magazine, Voice of Khorasan, earlier. That's pretty substantial for an offshoot of IS to come up with their own media organization like that, their own publications. And that media arm of ISKP, it puts out content in Arabic, English, Farsi, Pashto, Tajik, Urdu, and Uzbek. So just think about that, especially if anybody out there creates content or writes for a living. Think about the work that it takes and the effort it takes to put out something in just 2 languages. So, this ISKP media arm, it's no joke. They're pretty effective. Zelensky says the second prong consists of planning and carrying out attacks abroad, either directed, guided, or inspired. And what he points to was that they have been carrying out these attacks. Now, they're not necessarily on our radar here in the United States like Al-Qaeda might have been, especially in the years after 9/11, because the strikes haven't occurred in the United States. They haven't occurred in Western Europe. But he does get into that. He says ISKP continues to carry out attacks in Pakistan, rocket strikes in Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. They've targeted areas in the Maldives and Iran, and at least 15 other ISKP plots have been interdicted by law enforcement in India, Iran, Germany, Maldives, Qatar, and Turkey. Some of these were before the Taliban takeover. Some of them were after, which kind of points at, maybe the decline in ISKP activity inside of Afghanistan is tied to they're trying to push things more outside of their borders. Zelensky continues saying these findings indicate that the Taliban's so-called counterterrorism efforts are limited to its immediate security needs and not those of other nations, an approach that runs directly counter to the government's stated goal of garnering international support and official recognition. So it looks like the Taliban are finding out this whole counterterrorism thing is really hard. So if you break this down to like the very, very local level, it's easy, very easy, all things considered, to control, one city block and really strong arm your way into having total control of what happens there. But the broader and broader this goes and all of a sudden starts reaching out to influence operations to help direct attacks outside of the borders, that's something that the U.S. and top-tier intelligence organizations with all of the resources in the world still struggle with today. So the idea that the Taliban somehow would be able to stop these, not necessarily direct engagement, but just the motivating factors and the support, the online support of attacks outside of their territory, they're not going to be able to do that just at baseline. It's not going to be in the Taliban's wheelhouse. That is something that U.S., UK, NATO, Germany, all sorts of countries around the world could do. And that has been a major effort of, the global war on terror over the last 20 years, which gets into some of the policy implications here that Zelensky wraps up with. He says that if authorities had not thwarted so many of the plots described above, the international community would likely be putting far more pressure on the Taliban for seemingly allowing ISKP to conduct extensive terrorist operations from its territory. Unlike in 2001, when it was allied with the problematic jihadist actor in question, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban clearly regards ISKP as an enemy. And that is a major difference here. There were a fair amount of ideological differences between Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. They were not necessarily in line with everything, but they were much more on the same page back in the early 2000s than ISKP is with the Taliban today. They're in an outright war with each other, which raises the interesting question of, at what point or to what degree do Western nations get involved with the Taliban to help facilitate our broader war against terrorism, against international terrorism? It doesn't seem like a crazy situation. On the one hand, it sounds kind of crazy, right, for the U.S. to potentially start working with the Taliban to target ISKP fighters. But look, to be blunt, and I've talked about this a lot before, the Taliban are not interested in attacking the United States. They never have been. They never were. The Taliban is a domestic organization. They're focused on running the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. There's a little bleed over into Pakistan. Got to take that into consideration. But it's not on their top list of 500 things to do to kill Americans in the United States or even, across portions of Europe. They're not exporting their rule of law to other portions of the world. So the Taliban are very, very local. They want to clean house internally. And we do kind of have for a while now, coming on 10 years, a common enemy, an ISKP. So it wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world to find out that at some point we've been working with people inside of the Taliban government to try to target some of these ISKP members, especially some of the leadership. Zelen continues saying, Washington should therefore consider resuming the approach it took when targeting al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri in July of 2022. Remember, drone strike in Kabul after the U.S. evacuation. He says that is focusing on drone strikes against ISKP members involved in external operations planning. This is where, and it's tricky. Zelen is one of the leading experts in this field by a long shot, right? He's one of the go-tos, been studying this for a long time. I don't think we have the answer there. I think we've done a good job over the last 20 years of limiting the reach. Like, al-Qaeda is still very much a thing. I think for some reason people think that al-Qaeda went away, but they are still very much alive. They've dispersed. And I think it's fair to say over the last 20 years, these targeted drone strikes have done a good job of disrupting that organization, but you cannot discount, the information aspect of the U.S. carrying out strikes in Africa, in the Middle East, and in other countries, and not every single person that we've killed has been a terrorist leader, right? Every little piece of collateral damage, you have to wonder how much that comes back and bites us, how much of that shifts people over to maybe sympathizing with the people that we were targeting in the first place. So, it's concerning thinking about a long-term, indefinite drone campaign to try to do away with global terrorism. I don't think we have the core solution figured out there. It's a very Band-Aid type approach. It's a Band-Aid that's worked for 20 years, but signing off on that as the plan, the way to resolve this into the future makes me a little bit nervous. He wraps up by saying, paired with the current intelligence-led law enforcement approach, this strategy, the drone strike strategy, could help limit ISKP's ability to conduct successful attacks abroad in much the same way that U.S. efforts diminished the external operations capacity of other jihadist groups over the past 2 decades. So again, nothing but respect for Aaron Zelen. I would be interested in hearing more, and I haven't heard much in a long time, about how to defeat this international terrorist threat without the constant use of drones, right? It's a good thing, cut the head off the snake, make the organization shuffle a little bit, maybe have to alter plans or scrap those plans altogether. Good, puts them on their heels. But I don't know that if we look out here in 2023 and say, what is this going to look like in 10, 20, 30 years, if we're still carrying out drone strikes left and right across the globe, it feels to me like we haven't resolved the core issue of the global war on terror. But again, Aaron Zelen, awesome resource. Can't say enough positive things about him. I'll link his article. I'll link this article and his website, Jihadology, in the description below. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.